I'm Lisa Rowe Frostino, and I'm chair of the English department here at Eastern. And I'm not going to say much except to introduce our MCs here today. These are our teaching interns in Introduction to English Studies, English 202 here at Eastern. To the far left is Michaela Zagata. She is the intern in my class. Ryan Bayan, he is interning for Dr. Ken McNeil. And Jessica Link is interning for Dr. Meredith Claremont-Ferrand. So with no further ado, I will let them introduce our panelists.
Thank you everyone for coming today. So for our first panelist, we have Dr. Elsa Nunez. She received her BA in Spanish and English from Montclair State College, an MA in English from Farley Dickinson University, and an EDD in Linguistics from Rutgers University with a dissertation entitled The Acquisition of Grammatical Morphemes. She has more than 20 years of previous experience as a senior administrator at such institutions as the University of Maine System and City University of New York. As of August 2014, Dr. Nunez started her 9th year as president of Eastern Connecticut State University.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Michael Palumbo. Michael Palumbo graduated from the University of Connecticut in 1996 with a BA in English. Previously, he had worked as an editor, film festival director, photographer, graphic artist, webmaster, and instructional designer. He has been at Eastern since 2001, and currently he works in the Center for Instructional Technology at Eastern, where he supports the application and integration of technology across the curriculum and provides essential support services for the use of technology in teaching, learning, and research.
Our third panelist is Starshimar Bairam, who graduated from Eastern with a BA in English and a minor in Women's Studies. She completed her master's degree in Women's Studies at Southern, and in graduate school she served as a university assistant to the director of the Women's Center at Southern. In her positions at Eastern, Star creatively engages students in causes that provoke their growth and empower their futures. In the 4 years she has worked at Eastern, she supervised the Intercultural Center and today coordinates all operations of the Women's Center as well as the Sexual Assault and Interpersonal Violence Response Team.
Our fourth panelist is Chris Drury. He earned his BA in English from Central Connecticut State University in 2006, and while at Central he minored in journalism and was active in the Recorder, the student-run newspaper. Chris then stayed at Central and earned an MS in Counseling, Student Development in Higher Education in 2009. He began working at Eastern during the spring semester of 2011 and as a Student Development Specialist, and has been in his current role as Assistant Director of the Academic Services Center since August of 2013.
And our final panelist is William Besezi, who graduated with a Bachelor of the Arts and Master of the Arts in English from Clemson University in South Carolina. After serving as an adjunct faculty member at Clemson and coordinator for writing services at the Citadel Military College in Charleston, he moved to Western Washington University and began a career in academic advising. He has worked as an academic advisor at UNC Chapel Hill and as director for undergraduate education office in the College of Computer, Mathematical, and Physical Sciences at the University of Maryland. He then moved into the Associate Director position for Letters and Sciences at Maryland. He joined Eastern as Director of Academic Services Center in March of 2013.
So thank you to all of our panelists for just being here today and being willing to speak with us. So our first question is for all of our panelists. In Introduction to English Studies, which is the class that we are all teachers assistants in, we spend a lot of time on the question, what is English, and what is it as a study and as a field. So we'd like to begin with asking, what is English Studies to you?
You want me to go first?
However you see fit.
Oh, sure, I can certainly jump in. So when I think of English Studies, I don't think of it as just a single thread or just one voice, but I see it as something that is intercultural, if you will. And I do believe that English Studies does foster critical thinking skills as well as allows us to develop communication skills while you are participating in this particular field. When I think of English Studies, since I did pursue the degree here at Eastern, I was exposed to many things, and that certainly does include creative writing, critical thinking, critical writing, cultural studies, and as well as standards and substandards, but I'm hesitant to even use the word substandard, but rather other standards of English. So I think it's important that when we do think of English studies, that it's not this idea that it's just one voice that sort of makes up that particular field.
I want to, first of all, thank Dr. Faustino for putting this panel together, because I think it's really important that English majors and minors like you have before you a group of people who've done such different things after completing school and use their background in English in very different ways, but important ways. And I want to say thank you to the three students, Jessica, Mikael, and Ryan, for moderating the panel. And I think this is really good experience you're getting at Eastern to be in charge, that the faculty allows you to do that. It supports you in the development of your skills. So I'm thrilled to see the three of you in action. I grew up in the ghetto as a poor kid. And I learned very early, even before I was sort of, I wasn't very sophisticated, but I learned the power of words. And I remember being small and being scared of the drug addicts and the big kids and the big, the women were rough too. And I learned that I had a skill with words. So I started by saying, your mother's skin dies for Roto-Rooter. You know what Roto-Rooter is? The gutter people, the sewage people. And I learned that I could say that to someone and I'd make them cry, and I didn't have to punch them in the mouth and I didn't have to get a knife or a gun. I could make people cry with words. And that's how I got into really, really appreciating. Now, that was in a slightly negative way, but it was survival for me. I had to find a way to survive. That I had a real, sincere, and deep appreciation for words. And so when I started reading literature in high school, a little bit in elementary school, but mostly in high school, and then, of course, in college, I was fascinated by new words. Words that I had never used, because I came from a modest background and a lot of the vocabulary was not familiar to me. And also the sentence structure, because English is not my first language. So I got fascinated by words. And to this day, to me, English studies is about words, whether you're reading or writing. It's about the power of words. And to this day, as president, I can't tell you, I fight over a word in one of my speeches with people. I say, that's not the right word. I'm trying to think, and I'm in a meeting where that's not the right, and I know it's not the right word, and I can't think of the right word. People are looking in dictionaries and trying to find the right word. And what I find is that when I think about the words and the deep meaning of words, I'm able to better to communicate to the audience. And then also the other skill that I developed as an English major was the ordering of my ideas. I think by reading novels and reading, nonfiction a lot, I got to learn how you order a story, how you order, and everything is about a story. So even when I'm talking right now, I'm trying to tell a story about my life and how I encountered words. But to me, the study of English is really the study of words, whether you're writing them or reading them.
So when I thought about this question, I thought along similar lines, actually. But, I came to the conclusion that, yes, they call it the study of English because that's the language we speak in this country. But really, what are we studying? It occurred to me that we're really studying the transfer of ideas and concepts from one consciousness to another via words. Okay, and that's really what we're after, right? What is the meaning? What is the author trying to say? And when you do that, our job as scholars of this process is to discover the meaning the originator intended. Okay, and so what happens is whether someone's speaking to you in the moment or from a 1,000-year-old text, that's your job. And you pore over oral stories or various books and essays trying to get to the meaning. And you ask yourself this question all the time: what are they trying to say? And so you end up building what I call two very great superpowers. And that's actually the answer to one of the next questions, what those are. We'll talk more about that. But that's really what I came up with. It was the transfer ideas from one consciousness to another, and then trying to get the meaning from the originator to the recipient.
For me, and I'll follow up with that. For me, it was just an idea of understanding the human condition. I love to read. It came to me easily. And as I studied English and went on to get my master's in English, I realized all of these stories all talk about the same thing, all of our conditions, all the same problems that we have. I always thought it was funny to hear people talk about Shakespeare and not being able to access Shakespeare. But once my mind clicked into it, I realized Shakespeare was a master because these are the basic human conditions. We're all alike. Nothing's changed. Thousands of years have gone by and nothing's changed. But I think it's a byproduct of that is just what Elsa talked about, the power of the word. One word can change everything. A poorly selected word or a well-selected word, and everything changes after that. And we find that in life, down the line. So that was, with the things that you've already heard, I think it's just about the human condition and understanding that there's a lot of likenesses out there.
So yeah, I mean, I know a lot's been covered. I guess I would just add that I saw basically a couple different components to studying English. One I would think of as kind of an artistic expression, and that was reading other writers, poets, and I feel like the benefits of that are kind of self-sustaining. You grow as a person. The way you view the world is expanded when you read that, that kind of writing. And then additionally, you're getting practical skills. You're learning how to analyze those ideas. You're putting them down on paper and forming an argument. And that's something that is very practical. So the way I saw it, those were the two main elements to studying English or English studies as a topic or an academic subject.
Thank you very much.
So also in our class we talk about, well, why English? Why did you become an English major? And I know a couple of people that switched on to English either late in their career or even myself. I switched as a freshman. I was not technically an English major to begin with. So did you always want to be an English major, and why did you choose to major in English?
I'll start this one because it'll be short. I started in psychology and got into an industrial psych course in I think my sophomore year, and thought, oh my gosh, I'm never going to make it through psychology. I better switch to something. But it wasn't until I talked to my academic advisor who said, do you love it? Do you love to read? Do you love studying the literature and the English and learning about the grammar and punctuation? I said, I always have. I've been told I can't do anything with this. And he told me, study English. And it came out all right. And I didn't, I'm not teaching English now, but it taught me everything I need to know in the position that I'm in now.
It's funny, I wanted to be a history major, and I remember Professor Macaluso was my history professor, and I liked him. He was really hard. And at the same time, in freshman year, I had the privilege of having Dr. McGee as my English professor, and I love the faculty at Eastern. The English department is fabulous. You have great faculty members, and I just don't mean because they're so academic. They're so academically strong because they do their own research, and within their own scholarly areas, they're very strong. But they're just caring, loving people, and dedicated to the students. And Dr. McGee was a paraplegic. He sat in a wheelchair. He had been injured in the military, in the Army. And so when I went to college, I was, like I told you, from a modest background, very rough around the edges, very unsophisticated, and very inexperienced. And I hated to go to class because I just felt so inadequate. Everybody opened their mouths and they sounded so intelligent. They could do literary criticism. I couldn't even, put 3 sentences together coherently, I thought, and I was always embarrassed. And so some of you have heard me say this story. So Dr. McGee, I would go to class, and he would always take the roll. He'd take attendance, and he was very strict about it. You had to be in your chair. And he'd say, John Schwartz, Lisa Faustino, Michael Palumbo, Elsa Maria Nunez, what a beautiful name. Jack Schwartz, Bill Beasley. and every time I went in, at first I said, oh, why does he have to do that? And then one day he said, Michael Palumbo, Jack Schwartz, Elsa Maria Nunez, what a beautiful name. I said, I do have a beautiful name. It was the first time I really had heard my name. I didn't realize that at the time he was trying to make me feel comfortable and trying to make me feel special in the class, because he could see I was like, I was just not. And then I got my first paper back with 1,000 red marks. None of you do that anymore, do you, Lisa? Give thousands of red marks on a paper. It was like there was no white space on my paper. And I said, oh, my God. So I took it, I folded, stuck it in my pocketbook, and I said, that's it. I don't know how I'm going to ever pass this course. But at the bottom it said, I need to see you in my office. And then he had his office number. So, of course, I went because I'm obedient. I come from a culture where you respond to authority. So I went to his office shaking with my paper. And he said to me, Elsa, you have a lot of good ideas, but you are really, really behind in your writing. He said, we need to really work on it. So in addition to going to class, you have to come to my office and rewrite every paper with me sitting next to you. So for the entire semester, I would go to his class for an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it took me to rewrite. And I would sit next to him, and he was correcting papers or doing something. And then every once in a while, he'd look over and say, how you doing? And I would show him. But I was actually rewriting in his presence, and he knew that I needed that I couldn't do it independently. But eventually I could do it independently. He had enough confidence. And so I did, and I ended up with a B in English, and I became I just left there full of admiration for him. So I think a lot of it had to do with just my falling in love with him in a way. I mean, he was just a great man, and I found him to be so kind that I thought, I think I can do this, and he gave me the confidence to do it, and I went on and finished as a major. But it was, I think if I had had a different kind of experience, I would have continued with Dr. Macaluso in history.
I never wanted to be anything else but an English major from day one. Up until that point, making that decision, I loved reading and writing so much that was always the choice. When someone said, you can go to school and do this, I thought that was great because being able to read books and stories and any of the material that's out there, they talk about the written word being the greatest invention ever, because it opens up whole worlds to you, whether it's the world of a story in someone's imagination or something you didn't know before, some facts or figures or whatever. Just being able to accumulate all of that and experience all of that was something I just wanted to do all the time. When I don't know if you guys buy books digitally now, but when I had to buy books for college, we had the science textbooks and all kinds of textbooks, and then novels and anthologies for English. And in every semester you sell your books back. I never sold the English books back. I kept them. And I continue to read them. I read the stuff we didn't cover in class, and I read stuff that I've read before, and I still make notes in the margins. I don't know if you do that, but that's what I did. Because again, trying to pull out the meaning, what the author was trying to say about whatever it is that they thought was interesting enough to work that hard to put on paper. Because they're there to be had. And so it never occurred to me to do anything else.
For me, I too, I was pretty set on English as being my first major, my first choice. I went through the STEP-CAP program. That's how I became connected through Eastern, or admitted via Eastern. And my first English professor was Dr. Meredith James. And I was very nervous to be on campus, and called my mother all the time, asking her to come pick me up because I just felt like I wasn't going to fit in. I was just very much used to being with my sisters and my mom. And I remember meeting Dr. James and just sharing with her some concerns that I had, not only about being away from home, but also just about feeling like my work was just not good enough to be here at the university level. And so I remember writing papers in her class and her correcting it, and I think they still do those red marks, Dr. Nunez, just so you know. The red marks were all over the paper, but it certainly wasn't in a way to devalue my work, but more to make me into a better writer. And so the time and the patience that I experienced going through that course in STEP-CAP really sealed it for me that, yes, this is something that I want to do, and I'm going to be supported in doing it. So certainly the faculty relationships that you do build really do help you to continue on that track.
So I guess I kind of backed into English as a degree that I was pursuing, and that I wanted to be a journalist, and that's what I intended to study at Central. We didn't have a journalism, or Central did not have a journalism program at that time. So what you did was you majored in English and you minored in journalism. So there's a lot of students doing that. And then as time went on, I found out I was really enjoying the English classes and the lit classes a lot more than what I was getting. The practical skills I was getting in journalism were really helpful, but I think I really fell in love with the English major as I went along, much more than I expected to, and obviously wound up going in a different direction than that original journalism track, which is, I think, something Bill mentioned. I was undeclared when I started, and there was people saying, don't major in English because, at least with journalism, there's a obvious career path that stems from that. But I could say that of the people I knew and studied with, as far as studying journalism, that's a difficult field. It's difficult work right now, and I think I'm really happy that I majored in English, that we didn't have a journalism program, and that it wound up taking me down a different path than everyone who's working in, say, the newspaper industry right now.
Thank you very much.
That was some great answers. Thank you, guys. It seems to me that one thing that's been highlighted on is that many English majors and people in the humanities are fundamentally different because they seem to view education as a means instead of an end. And when you graduate, it's not something that just ends and you go into the business world or whatever world you do. It's something that will continue to fundamentally change you. So with that in mind, what would you guys say is the most important thing that you learned as an English major?
I'll take that one first. So I thought about that a lot because I really wanted, and I wrote some stuff down, so bear with me as I read it. I talked about those 2 superpowers you learn as an English major. As you study English, you develop the ability to discern an author's meaning with very little effort and very quickly, even if the originator isn't communicating well. So you can pick up a manual for a technology you've never heard of, written by a guy in another country whose primary language is not English, and where other people might be totally confused, you know exactly what they were trying to say. You pick up on cues in the word choice or the sentence structure and piece together the meaning that was intended, regardless of what was actually written on the page. And so the superpower that comes from this is the power to learn. Having an English degree taught me first and foremost how to learn. And with that power, you can learn anything else, any career, any job, any task that you want to do. You want to be something, you can find resources now online or in books or wherever, and with what seems like only the power to read, you can master that subject. And so with this skill, you can accumulate knowledge and skills far beyond the more narrow scope of other disciplines. And then as you begin to accumulate knowledge, the second superpower begins to emerge. Your ability to originate the message becomes quite sharp. The writers you study write for an audience, and so they're always considering their audience every step through the process. So whether you're writing an email or a report or a training document or trying to communicate verbally, you take into account your audience because you're practicing this process. Got lost. So you take into account the audience and you become adept at choosing words that clearly and efficiently communicate your meaning. The understanding of it starts to seem effortless to the recipient. And if they still don't get your meaning, you're able to reach into their background, whether it's their field or their industry or just the common human experiences we all have, and you're able to put your meaning into a context that they can relate to because you've spent countless hours poring over allegories, analogies, metaphors, and similes. And so it all just starts to come natural. So in gaining your English degree, you gain the power to learn anything and the power to teach anything. That's the power to understand and to be understood. And that is what really makes us great.
Anyone
I'll go
who
next.
wants
All right. I think the most important thing I learned was that's when I think I really start to get an understanding of what education should be about, which is I think you hear an idea or you hear an argument and you're able to really analyze it and think about it critically and then express either your dissent from that or your agreement with it. So I think at its core, that's what I think education is. There's a lot of people in a lot of different roles trying to tell you, what to think about something or how to vote or how to feel about a certain issue. But what being an English major, I think, did for me was be able to hear that, to read that point of view, and then really be able to seriously consider whether that's something that I personally agreed with or didn't, and then why or why not, and then to be able to actually articulate that. I think that's a really important piece of just living everyday life, and then professionally, once you're working, that's something that's going to be incredibly important. I think is to really think critically about these ideas that you might be reading, that you might be hearing, and to be able to express yourself as far as the way you think and feel about it. And I think that's the most important thing I gained studying English. I think that's when it really sunk in.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. And for me, one of the most important things that I learned is to be more thoughtful when I am reading and interpreting different texts, to not make the mistake that whatever it is that I'm reading is just one side of the conversation, or that is the only side of the conversation. I think that when I initially started here at Eastern, I often made the mistake that if I was reading a novel about a particular person, let's say that they were a member of the Black community of some sort, making the assumption that they're telling the story for everyone within that community. And being a student within the English major, that certainly was something that was challenging for me. I was number 3 out of 4 girls in my family, and my voice was often not heard because I was sort of quiet, and I would prefer writing rather than talking. And so I saw firsthand account with my experience that although my sisters would want to do something and I was silent in the corner, they certainly were not speaking for me or really highlighting or trying to figure out even whether or not Star wanted to be a part of whatever game they certainly wanted to play or be a part of. So a big lesson was to certainly remember that there are voices within groups who do not have access to privileged platforms, and those platforms sometimes are more accessible and are more heard than others. And with the work that I'm involved in now, it truly is working to reach out to those who feel silenced and creating spaces of comfort where they can talk about whatever it is that they're battling or going through, so that they know that there are ears wide open, really wanting to hear more about their experiences or concerns that they may have.
I'm just thinking I'd echo everything that I'm hearing right now. It really is. The thing you learn is how to communicate, and that you learn from reading the power of the written word and how you can use the written word to get things done that you need to get done. And one other thing that I would say, just one word, is punctuation. Has to be one of the most important things that I learned. And I find even in positions that I've had where I'm reading resumes and cover letters, I know about somebody based on their punctuation, based on their grammar. I can tell how much work or how much effort they've put in to an important document like a resume and a cover letter very quickly, just by reading through a cover letter and kind of checking out, do you have use of the language? Do you understand how to communicate with others?
Bill, I must tell you, one of the most proud moments of motherhood for me is that my children know how to use a semicolon. Gotta learn how to use a semicolon. That's not how you do it, and they're proud of that. Neither of them was an English major, but they're both very proud that they have great use of punctuation. I am so happy that I was trained the way I was trained as an English major, because for me, good writing is clear thinking. And as an administrator, I'm obliged to communicate my ideas to people and to try to get people to adopt the ideas that I have and to support the ideas that I have. And I can't do them by dictating that. I mean, that doesn't happen at a university. It's persuasion. And so I have to work very hard every day to make sure that I'm clear about the issue. And one of the ways that I've trained myself to be clear is to write about it, even if I share the writing with no one. So if I'm going to make an argument for resources at the system office, I write that out. And then I can see where the holes in my argument are and where my logic may be faulty. I can actually see it. I don't think I would see it if I were just talking about it, but because I'm writing it, you can actually see that one argument has 2 sentences, the other has 20, you know, and that you're making the case, but you're not really systematically thinking all of the points through. And so that's been a great asset for me. The other thing is that I give 3 major speeches at the university called the University Address. One of them is the state of the university. I spent a lot of time on those speeches, particularly the one in August, the first one. And what I'm trying to do is convey to the university what the condition of the university is. Well, you know what? That's really complex. And unless I really spend time not only thinking about it, but writing it out, these are the strengths, these are the weaknesses, some analytical work has to go into that, then I can't convey the complexity of the issues as I would like to. So for me, the best training I got, and for me, the connection between good writing and clear thinking has been a key to my being able to communicate with various audiences.
Thank you. I think that these are all things we all agree as English majors are really important and something that we've taken away from our studies, even incomplete as they are right now for ourselves. But something that I hear a lot as an English major is that it's easy for me to write a paper, come up with an idea, or analyze a piece of text. And I think that this can be definitely a misconception that because you declared an English major, your work is therefore easy for you. So we wanted to know, what do you think the hardest thing was about your English major or your studies in English?
I graduated from Eastern, which is awesome. I'm proud to truly say that. And I thought Dr. Tapia was here, but I took a course with her, Modern American Grammar, and she drove me crazy. She truly did. I met with her often and Dr. Steve Ferrucci with help because I could not diagram sentences, and I was so annoyed. Every time I would go to the class, I would sit in the back because I was not sitting in the front anymore because I just was not understanding. And she would remind me, no, you're going to get it, and I never did. And I've thought about, taking the course again since I do work here at Eastern, but I just don't think I'm going to put myself through it. If my children, in the future, if I have children and they have to diagram sentences, I'm going to let them teach me and just sit there and just take whatever lessons they have to give. But for me, that truly was the most challenging.
I would say, in terms of the coursework, linguistics had to be the most challenging content within the English program I did. But I think just changing the way I thought about what it was to be an English major and writing essays, writing papers. For a long time, I thought it was, you read, if you're reading a book, you come up with some kind of, conclusion about it, and then you back it up with references within the book by reading other writers, what they've published on the material. And I think I had one instructor. It was actually a great class. He's from an American Studies background, so he really infused a lot of history, which is really important too. I think that I learned a lot about history being an English major as well. But the way he phrased, what you want to be doing when you're writing a paper is that you need to come up with a question that you don't already know the answer to. It's not drawing a conclusion and backing it up. It's coming up with after, while you're reading it and after you read a book, what question is unanswered? What can I explore more? And I think that's when writing a paper, developing a thesis became a little bit more difficult and challenging. But once I started approaching it that way, I think I was getting a lot more out of the material and I think while it's difficult at first, that really made a big difference.
Well, for me, this is such an easy question to answer. I'm a very slow reader, very slow. And it was hard for me to keep up with all the reading in the courses. I would see everybody, you know, sort of flying through it, and I would be so ashamed to say that I was a slow reader. And then now, of course, I'm in my 60s. I've met a lot of people who say they're slow readers. But in those, you know, when you're with your classmates, nobody admits that. And it was hard. It was really hard to keep up. And I also had a part-time job, so, you know, just keeping up with the reading. Today, when I get a very dense email, I'll read it once, and I know better. I'll go back and read it twice, you know, because often there's something there. All my responses in email are legal documents. They can appear in court. So whatever I say in an email, how I write it is a legal document, and I'm very aware of that. So I'm very deliberate about reading a document 2, sometimes 3 times to make sure that I absorb all of it. I haven't gotten faster. I read a lot. You know, right now I'm reading Catherine the Great. I love to read Russian history, and I've read all of Massey's biographies, but they're thick. You know, they're 600 pages, and it takes me a while to get. I don't care. I carry the same book around until I finish it. And so people, are you still reading that? Yes, I'm still reading that. But it was the hardest thing.
I think the hardest thing for me was a bookend to that was slowing down and writing, learning to write, rewrite, put it aside, rewrite it again, take another look at it. I wanted, as you study English, as you go further and further, and I remember in my graduate degree, somebody telling you to do a 10-page paper became a problem because I had 20 pages of information to give, but I was limited to 10 pages. And to stop and write and rewrite became very difficult. And I'll add, because we've just mentioned email. Email is killing the language. Email is killing the punctuation and grammar that we talked about because we're not allowing ourselves to write and rewrite. But as English majors, you're starting that process now, where you're starting just like a sport. If you practice and practice, you get better at it. I think people, especially English majors, become great writers even in email because they're looking for their shortfalls automatically. They know they have to get information out quickly, but they're able to stop for a second and say, wait, before I hit send, let me really look at this and make sure it says what I wanted to say.
So I think, you know, from what you've heard and what I was going to say is that I don't want to compare to other disciplines, but I dare say that being an English major demands an investment of time that the others don't. And so not only do you have to read, whether you're a slow reader or a fast reader, lots and lots of text, but then you have to read it again and again until you get what you're getting out of it. And then you have to write about it and read that again and write about it again. And then you give it to someone who looks at it and says, now you need to defend what it is that you wrote. And this process goes on and on and on. And that's a lot of time. Okay, so, you know, as a student, I think that's where the hardest part comes, is finding the time to spend the energy and put in the effort that you need to go through that process. And then in employment, I think the hard thing was knowing what to do and then what to do next and what to do after that, because the discipline doesn't provide you with a path. With the exception of editor jobs, there was no want ads that said English major wanted. You had to decide what you were going to do and then forge your own path. So that, to me, that was the hardest part.
Thank you.
So this is actually kind of a nice segue into our next question. I know as an English major, I get asked, well, are you going to go into teaching? Or what are you going to do with an English major? And I know that's a very big question that I know a lot of English majors have. Oh, what am I going to actually do with my English major? So our next question is, how do you use your English degree in your job right now? And how does that carry into other aspects of your life?
Well, for me, I work in technology, and every 6 months technology changes. And so a lot of the people who study technology, they can actually, in this day and age, come out of school and find that everything they learned is now obsolete. Whereas what we learn in the English discipline, it's never obsolete. The skills apply to whatever you do. And so I count my degree as the most valuable asset I have. It can't be lost, broken, stolen, taken away from me. At least I don't think so. When my work right now, I work with faculty and staff to try to help them learn and absorb new technology. And so very rarely does a faculty member come in and say, I want to learn XYZ technology. No, they come in completely submerged in their material for their discipline, and before I can teach them anything or recommend anything, I need to completely understand what they're trying to do. I need to understand their discipline, what they're trying to teach their students, how they organize their material, and only after understanding all that can I turn around and say, well, here's the solution to your problem, and here's the technology that'll help you do that. So again, it's about understanding and then communicating clearly, back and forth.
It's so funny. Eastern is very well respected of the 17 universities as part of the system, and I have a lot of power because I was an English major. And the reason is that most people that I'm working with are not good writers, and they don't like to write. And I'm a great writer, and I love to write, so I get big assignments. And so I'm usually at the forefront of whatever's going on, either writing the doc, drafting it, or editing it, or doing something, but I'm always in the mix. And I always say that gives me a lot of power in a really way, because people will be around and, oh, Elsa's here, Elsa will write it, or Elsa will give it to Elsa. And and you find that you're a resource to a group, and that's empowering, because you can help the group, and you can make a difference in doing the work. At Eastern, I have a staff of vice presidents, and the skills are uneven. I've got people who write, 3 sentences, and that's the report, or 5 sentences. And that report has to go outside of Eastern, and I find myself working with them in a collegial way to expand their ideas and to make their writing stronger and better. And that's the teaching part of my experience, and also the work that I've done in writing for all these years. And then I had a vice president, Dennis Hannon, who went to Villanova and just had a fabulous undergraduate experience, and he could write, he couldn't write less than 10 pages, It was the opposite experience. And I was always editing Dennis's work down because it was too long, and he had very complex ideas that he wanted to convey. So I think what has happened over time for me has been that I have seen the skills that I've developed as an English major really create an atmosphere for me as an administrator where I can really contribute. And it's not just to the ideas that are being conveyed, but to the actual production of documents that convey those ideas. And that is, in essence, a lot of power that you have, because not everybody's a good writer and not everybody's comfortable writing.
I could just start. I was thinking, what have I used this week? And I could think of, a number of things just over the past few days and the next couple of days. In addition to the daily need to communicate through email and with, just to communicate verbally, that's every day, constantly those skills come into play. But just thinking about things like the need to draft a letter to go out to the faculty at the university. If you didn't study English, or you're not comfortable with grammar in the language, that's a really challenging task, and thankfully I'll be able to rely on the skills I gained as an English major to do that. We were drafting interview questions for job candidates, and you start to think about how when you're writing a paper, one argument leads into the next. Your concluding sentence in one paragraph transitions into the next. It's a flow. We reworked it to kind of base on a flow such as you would writing a paper for one of your English classes. We're going to a conference later this week to talk about what we've done as an advising unit. Specifically what I'll be talking about is what we've done to follow through on some initiatives that were started as a result of some grant money. And the way that we'll discuss that is developing a narrative, maybe three main points. Now we're going to back up. How have they been effective? What have we done? And essentially, it'll be presenting this just as you would organize a paper for an English class. It'll be that's what's going to help me to clearly convey at the conference, what we've been doing, and try to make it a compelling argument. So, like I said, it's every day, and I'm just thinking of this week, all the different ways, although it's not directly applied to reading literature or analyzing literature, how I'm using the skills that I gain.
I think it's sort of a subtle process. It isn't something I think about every day as, what am I doing today that I brought from my degree, that I learned when I earned my degree or studied English? It's a subtle process. So somebody outside might say, oh, you study English, you're reading stories, what can you do with that? But they don't understand, as we've been talking about today, that I understand the language. I understand how to look for patterns. I understand how to communicate. I understand if I change one word in a sentence, it can make all the difference to you as a reader. So I agree with everything that's being said, but I see it in a more subtle way. It isn't something that, and I've talked to people before, that if an engineer, a mechanical engineer, studies engineering and they get their master's in engineering, they're applying the formulas that they use very specifically to some of the things they're doing on the job. English majors do the same thing. We also have lots of formulas that we use, lots of rules that we use, but we apply them more subtly in our jobs, and the jobs span the gamut. It really is, as Mike pointed out earlier, how you start to map out and make a roadmap for your own careers in reaching those careers, because there aren't a lot of businesses that say we're looking for English majors, but a lot of English majors are working in businesses. And so they've worked their way in there with internships and getting in a different way till somebody who knows what they're doing recognizes this English major is very strong. This is what we want here. And so again, those subtle things come out, and you just use it in life. You use it in everything that you do.
I have the opportunity to connect with many students through the Women's Center, my employed student ambassadors, and sometimes they come in talking about different papers that they're writing and will ask me to proofread them. I think some of them are slowing down on that because they see that I really will read them and provide some constructive feedback and urge them to revise and go through that process of writing. But also with serving as an advocate for victims, sometimes I'll sit down with students to help them with writing out restraining orders or victim impact statements, and that really does really help them to think more thoughtfully about how they want to communicate the impacts that violence does have on their lives. And sometimes, when they initially sit down to write all of that out, some of the impacts can be miscommunicated in how they initially wrote it. So we'll read it out loud, and I'll ask, is this what you're trying to communicate? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. So that's how I certainly do use my degree. Listening is very important to the work that I'm doing now here at the university. So that's how it works for me.
Thank you very much.
So we've touched on how you guys use your English degree in everyday life, but with one glance at this paper, we can also see that you guys are involved in journalism, graphic design, web presence, film, and all of these fine arts and medias that are really intertwined and really very emergent in today's society with, the internet and web presence. So with that in mind, what other kinds of jobs are opportune for English majors in addition to what we've already talked about?
Well, I kind of mentioned this before, but I'll tell a quick story. When I was in Washington, I was friends with a guy who founded and owned a very famous kayak company. And I talked to him about the students at the school that I worked at, and I said, well, who do you hire? Who do you want to work for you? Do you want business majors? You're running a business. He said, business majors are the last people that I want have anything to do with my company. And he said, the reason is, when I started this company, I did it myself. I built this, brick by brick from the ground. It's how I want to run it, and I don't want a business major telling me how to run things that they've learned from their professors. But he said an English major would be perfect, because an English major will listen to what I've done, will see the structure of the business that I have, and will fit themselves into the structure the way I want this business run. So there was just one example of very clearly somebody in business who didn't want a business major because he had his own ideas about that and would more take the humanities major, the English major in before somebody else.
Well, it's interesting because I have to look at data all the time about how the students, the graduates of Eastern do, and the two, according to the business people that I talk to in Connecticut and even nationally, because I'm on a lot of national boards, the two top majors that they recruit are English and philosophy. Philosophy is the #1 major to get into law school, and English is the #2 major to get into law school. People don't realize that. And the reason is people think you're smart. They just think if you're an English major or philosophy major, you made it through those two tough majors. One of those two tough majors, you're smart. And so they will hire you to do marketing, to do advertising. You should really push yourself to apply for jobs that on the surface may not look like you qualify. I mean, you can't. A high-level job, I'm not talking about it, but if they're entry-level jobs, you should apply and put in that cover letter that you're an English major, you have critical thinking skills, you're a great writer, because they'll often look at your application because they do understand that you've got a set of skills that are really important, and they can teach you the content, but they can't teach you the skills.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think I've mentioned already, you can learn any of the entry-level stuff. You can go out there and apply yourself to any industry and very quickly pick up the skills you need to succeed at the entry level. And then building on that, they will recognize what you can do. And as you move up in industries and in levels, your skills will apply to communicating with people, managing people, writing proposals, and doing all the upper level stuff that will get you advancement in whatever industry you choose.
Yeah, I've encouraged different ambassadors who have declared English as their major, but also an interest in law and politics, to also intern in different spaces and get some experience through that as well. So I certainly do hear what the other folks are certainly saying, but with me declaring English as a major, right now I'm writing guidelines and reviewing policies that the state of Connecticut is presenting on addressing different issues such as sexual assault on college campuses. And students are asking, how do I get involved in that? And so I sit down and really expose them to that space to say, well, this is how you can be involved, and this is how your voice can be heard. This is how you can even begin writing legislation as well. So I think that that's also important, to not feel like you have to wait until you graduate to begin putting this stuff into practice outside of Eastern.
I think it's been pretty much covered by everyone else. I would just venture to add that, I mean, essentially anything is an option, maybe aside from fields that require any kind of special health certification and other kinds of certification, but anything is an option from here on out. And I would also just add that some people said there's no money in it, but I know for a fact that some of the most financially successful people I personally know were English majors.
So we only have a few minutes left in the period, but thank you so much for your answers to all of these questions. I think that they are questions that, as English majors, they're posed to us a lot. What are you going to do with an English degree? Are you going to be a teacher? How are you going to use it? What important things do you learn from it? And you provided us and the students who are in attendance with a lot of helpful answers. We do have a couple questions for you individually. Our first is for Dr. Nunez. I know when I was receiving questions from students in my English 202 class, many of them wanted to know how you moved from being a linguist to being a president of a college.
Yeah, this connects to and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to speak quickly and try to condense my ideas here. When I fell in love with words at a very early age, and so going into linguistics was sort of natural for me. I loved, and the dissertation titled that the acquisition of grammatical morpheme. I was interested in how words were constructed, so going into linguistics, I was a Lenia Tapia at a state university called Ramapo State in New Jersey, New Jersey's only public liberal arts college. So I taught the same amount of courses as our faculty does here. I was tenured and promoted, and I was in an English department where I was the linguist. And so as I was doing that work, teaching, I loved it. The chair of my department, Bob Christopher, got promoted, and he got promoted to become a vice president for academic affairs. And when he got that promotion, he remembered that I used to do a lot of the legwork for him as chair. He would ask me to do scheduling. He would ask me to do, follow up with meetings. And what he noticed was I was very organized and I was a good administrator. So he asked me if I would be interested in going into administration. And I said, no, I love teaching. And he said there was a fellowship in Washington called the ACE Fellowship, or the American Council on Education. And they recruited faculty members and introduced them to administration to see if they would like it. So that year, I was in my early 30s, 30 people in the country were selected. I was one of them. And they exposed us to what it would be to be an administrator. So you learned about collective bargaining, the unions, you learned about budgeting, etc. Of the 30, only 12 went on to administration. The others hated it. They said, I never want to do this. I want to go back to teaching. And I was one of the ones that said, I think I can do this. And that led me to become an administrator, a dean. And so it was through my faculty role that I became a president.
Thank you.
Our next question is for Mike Palumbo. I know when I was reading my questions, they actually had a lot of questions concerning you. And one of them in particular, or a couple of them I should say, were how you became an editor. So can you just briefly explain how you moved up in the ranks in the publishing industry to become an editor?
Moved up in the ranks is kind of a misnomer. As I said, there were jobs back then that said English major wanted, okay, and they were entry level. And so as a technical editor, I went to a magazine and they literally gave me a test and they wanted to know where all the semicolons went and where all the commas went, and I took that test, and this particular magazine was a computer industry magazine, and this was in the late 90s, so the internet was just starting to come around and things, and I had no computer knowledge at that time. So I'm looking at these articles written by engineers and going, well, I don't know what that word is, but I know it's a noun. I don't know what that word is, and I don't know what that word is, but this structure is wrong, okay? And so having those skills allowed me to edit this test, and they looked at it and said, well, you have the skills to do this, regardless of the fact that I knew nothing about the content they were writing about. And so that got me in the door. And then from there, I moved into different areas of publishing. So in addition to copywriting and doing product reviews, I got into some of the technical aspects of production that included graphic design and photography and layout, and and even in some cases marketing and some of the business end of the industry. And in particular, like I said, the internet was just coming out, and we were wrestling with what do you do as a publisher with the internet? How much do you give away for free? How do you make money with it? I'm fond of saying, and I have the proof, that I came up with charging for ads online by clicks before Google did, because I have a file where we came up with that strategy and implemented it without the tools that Google designed at least 4 years before they did it. Now, I don't have $1 billion, but they do it much better than we came up with. But it was that kind of stuff. You just start applying your skills to the business you're in, and whatever's going on, you make use of it.
Thank you.
This question is directed for Ms. Byram. What's it like working at the university where you got your English degree, and how has Eastern changed since you were a student here?
I thought much about this question. Working at the institution is like working back at home. I spend more time here at Eastern than I do at home. And I just remember being a student and feeling very comfortable being here. And so returning here to work as an employee, it just allows me to really repay the university where I truly developed, and my work ethic really developed here. And yes, I'm repaying both loans as well as repaying this university for everything that they poured into me and the faculty. And walking around campus sometimes, I'll see them and I'm like, hi, doctor. And they're like, no, I'm not doctor anymore. And I'm like, oh, yes. Hi, how are you? And the love and the appreciation that I have for them, and then the appreciation that they express to me for the work that I'm doing here is just truly something that I really respect and appreciate. When I think about how it's changed, knowing about the Writing Center that's here, that wasn't here when I was a student. I was a tutor. I wasn't a paid tutor. It was something that we did for a credit, and I loved doing it. And I remember Dr. Malinchek really talking much about having a writing center and her vision for that. So it was really great to come back and see that level of support that's being offered for students here at the institution. And my students are coming to me to revise and asking me to give advice. While I do it, I also urge them, go to the Writing Center, sit down with you all as tutors, and receive the support that you all are offering. And I think that truly is a great addition that we have here today.
So our next question is for Chris Drury. I know a lot of my freshmen that I mentor through the first year program are here, and I'm always encouraging them to meet with their professional advisor. And so one of our questions was, what experiences from being an English major are you bringing to helping Eastern's English majors now as a professional advisor?
So I think it's always kind of fun when an English major comes in and they don't have the pre-education or the education edition, where they kind of have an idea of what direction they're heading, and they may not be too sure. And I think the one piece of advice I give them first is just that you get a job interview by being able to write. First thing anyone looks at is a cover letter. You have 100 of them. You're going to set yourself apart by being able to write. So first off, that skill is going to get you in the door for a job, and it's going to make you a valuable commodity wherever you do want to work. And then in addition to the learning in the classroom, what I encourage students to do that I learned from my experience is to go get involved and try it out hands-on. Like I mentioned, I wanted to be a journalist, so I joined the paper. And by doing that, you find, is it a path that you definitely want to follow for a long time, or maybe you don't. And either way, that's helpful information. And along the way, you might learn a lot of other things. So by me becoming just involved on campus and joining the paper, I wound up talking to a lot of different types of people who did different types of work on campus. Whether it be a business research center, or say eventually someone who was working in student activities, working with the clubs. Then you find out, well, that actually looks like a pretty interesting job, and I know, I could do that. That looks like it's something that I would enjoy doing. So just by getting involved in exposing yourself to the campus or the general community, by just doing some hands-on work, joining a club, I think that's where you start to figure it out, and then everything you're learning in class is you're able to apply that and bring it to whatever you do end up deciding to do.
Thank you.
And our final question for Bill Besesi. I know a lot of the kids that I've talked with have talked about graduate school and whether or not they're deciding to pursue that if they choose to stick with the English major. So if you could just briefly explain to us how your experience was in studying English in a master's.
Well, this is the last question, so I'll keep it short. And I've watched people leave. I guess they've got class, they've got other things to do. So I'm going to tell you a secret. Graduate school is fantastic. Yeah. It is the best type of school you could ever possibly attend. And the reason is you finally get among a group of peers and study what it is that you love and what you want to study. And I recommend to you, if you go to graduate school, find a school that teaches an area of English, an area maybe literature that you want to study. You're going to find the greats in that program. You're going to find the people who are experts in their fields, who are writing your textbooks. And you get to be around a great group of friends, study what you love. If you get an assistantship, you don't have to pay for it. Find a place that has assistantships. Tuition's free, you get a stipend to live off of, and that's all you have to do for 2 or 3 years. So I would just say, I won't go into it too far, it's unbelievable. I never had as good of friends as I did in school. As we kind of competed amongst ourselves, we didn't have the competition that we had as undergrads. It was a friendly competition, and it really kind of set us in to our life's directions.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to come and talk to us. I think a lot of the English majors and I will agree that this definitely enlightens us about what we can do with our English major. So thank you so much. Oh, yeah.